So if there's anything you don't understand throughout tonight's class or any of the other classes, feel free to just send a chat. I'll do my best to have a look at it and respond. If it's a regular question, we'll leave it for the end for the Q&A. Okay. So let's get started. Just to keep a little progress before we go to the shir for tonight. Let's have a look at what our goals were when we started. I find that that's always a helpful thing. So we started with these goals. We had an objective to feel confident that you can understand the Mishnah well enough to help your children, if you have kids, with their Mishnah and Gemara homework with the aid of an English text. And look, I hope we're on our way. We identified some barriers, language, lack of punctuation. In the meantime, we're all committed to using an English translation that does have Nakudas, historical context we covered yesterday. Most of it, who the people were, how Gemara came into play. Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, where Hashem gave him the oral Torah, all the fine print, a lot of the halachas and a lot of other things. Halach l'Moshe Misina, we call them. I'm not going to go into all those details. We didn't yesterday. But there was a large body of knowledge that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe gave it to his Talmid Yeshua, to his student, and so on and so forth throughout the generations. Eventually, things became weak under Roman rule. There was a lot of churn, so to speak, and in order to protect our Messiah, our tradition, we say in today's vernacular called an audible. And the pasuk actually was used as Eis Lasas Lashem Heferu Torasech. It's a pasuk when it comes a time to do something for Hashem. Sometimes you even need to change for the proper time of what's going on. Okay, so that was basically the historical context. People started to forget things. So first the basic rules were written, the halachas, which was Mishnah. And then there was a lot of discussion about the Mishnah that was called Gemara. And that comprises the body of knowledge, which we call Torah Shabbal Peh. Again, it's a misnomer. It's actually the Torah Shabbal Peh. The oral Torah is actually, written down now. Okay, and this insider talk, number 4, was something that we spent most of our time yesterday trying to get the insider talk, trying to understand that somebody's whispering in our ear. And when we translate, when we come and translate phrases and words, we have to, the example we gave yesterday was the Kohen Gadol. So it says, Pashat Yarad V'Taval, he took off, he went down, he titled himself. And again, if you don't know the context, you're going to have a problem with it. So we explained it's the Kohen Gadol. It's once a year on Yom Kippur. Okay, the previous talk, I sent an email to the group. I sent around the YouTube of it, the talk and the Q&A separately. So you can have a look at it if there's something that you're not clear about, or you certainly can bring it up during question and answer. And in fact, number 5 was brought up during question and answer, was about the references from a time period, and number 7, relevance. So we already started talking about much or most of what our objectives are. Okay, so we finished lesson 5 yesterday. Again, this is in the introduction to Gemara. In our series, the green pages are an introduction to Gemara, and the blue pages are Gemara itself. Hopefully we'll be getting to Gemara very soon, hopefully as early as tomorrow. I depending on pace and all, but that's my expectation, is we'll get to it tomorrow. Now I wanted to show you something. I did not mention it, but these vocabulary words, okay, we have throughout the, every new lesson has vocabulary words. In the book, the answers are in the back. And the idea is usually the vocabulary words are introduced as we use them in the Gemara. These happen to be a very difficult tongue twisters that it happens to be. The difference between hechi and hachi and hecha. These are probably the most difficult vocabulary words. If someone sends, if you remember to send me a chat at the end of, let me mark it down now. I'm gonna, when I post, when I send an email with the chart with today's YouTube, I'm gonna try to include a vocabulary word if I remember. Okay, list. I'll try to send you the vocabulary list, which in the back of the book, so for those who don't have the book, so you can use it. So let's get started on today's talk. Now, what we're going to talk about now is going with the concept that you don't teach two things at the same time. Now, this is a very strong thread that goes throughout our book, and my educational philosophy, based on a lot of literature and a lot of research, is that you don't try to teach two things at once. This is really, really important, especially if you find yourself later on, encountering some difficulty. Very often it's because you're trying to learn two things at the same time. Sometimes in the Gemara, it's even 3 or 4 things at the same time. There's tonight in the East Coast, the Northeast, tonight's meteor showers. Tomorrow, I believe, the 12th of August, it hits its peak. There's some beautiful meteors. Got to get away from the city, look up on a clear night. I'm hoping today or tonight will be clear enough. After class, we'll go up to Harriman State Park and have a look. It's really extraordinary. And if I was teaching you now about a meteor shower, let's just take this as an example. And I was explaining what a meteor is, and I was using a lot of words that you might not be familiar with. Now, one example of that would be if, let's say, I would discuss angles. Let's say I was to say that this star in the Big Dipper, this star is at a right angle to the next star. And now you don't know what a right angle is because you're not familiar with geometry. So either you're totally lost, you have no idea what a right angle is, or if I explained it to you, you'd have to learn two things at once. You'd need to know about meteor showers, and you also would need to know about a right angle. So I'm teaching you two things at the same time. It's very confusing, and some people can master it. Many or most people find it a little overwhelming. So the philosophy that we have here is when we know something is being brought up that's new to the learners, you guys, then we explained it to you earlier. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about today, I'll give you a little advance. We're going to talk about how the logical flow of Gemara works. And this Rabbi Spivak, the author, had another brilliant idea, which I'll show you soon, to several ideas to explain how this works. Someone made a statement. There's a little bit of a conflict. We have two options for resolving that. And what we actually do in the book, which we will get to tonight, in Yirtzeh Hashem, is the logical components of a Gemara. These are the two main things that we'd like to cover tonight. One, learning how the logical flow works, and how the individual components are of the logic. So, just for example, a memra is a statement. Okay. And usually we start off a new topic with a statement. A kasha is a question on the statement. A teretz is an answer. Okay. Why would this be in the introduction? Because when we start Gemara, we want learners to be familiar with these different logical components so that we can sort of pull them together and be able to help us along with it. So let's go through the lesson now. We're going to go through our shir. I'm not going to read the entire text. Like I said, again, it's going to be available. You can have a look at it on the YouTube afterwards. But what we're starting to talk about, I'm going to use my cursor and underline from time to time. So the style of Gemara is very different than Mishnah. Mishnah Yos is plural of Mishnah. Okay, Mishnayos are referred to all of the Mishnah. So the Gemara is very different than Mishnah because Mishnah is basically like they are remembered. They are facts. It's bottom line what the halacha is. The Kohen Gadol had to go and immerse himself in the mikveh. To know the reason why that's so, or if we ask why doesn't he wash his hands and feet when he comes out of the mikveh a different time of the year, that would be something that came through in the Gemara. Okay, so what we try when we get to Gemara, there are much more of these logical flows. So the Gemara, again, we begin with a Mishnah, which we showed yesterday, followed by a Gemara. And the Gemara tends to go into some logic. This word sugya is a topic which is discussed in the Gemara. And what we hear is there are times, though, when you'll see straight halachas with no discussion. And one possibility is that you're learning a Mishnah. Every Gemara begins with a Mishnah, again, because after all, the Gemara is just the explanation of the Mishnah. The other possibility is that you're learning a Brisa. And a Brisa was, remember we talked yesterday, we spoke about how this large body of knowledge was collected, right, written, collected, and put in different buckets, put in different file folders. We use the computer analogy. And we had the Siddharim of Mishnayos, we had Zrayim for things, halachas of things that were growing. And Mayed is what we learned yesterday, which was Yuma as part of that. Now, Rebbe did not put every single thing in the Mishnah. Here we go, this is important. So when Rebbe was putting together the Mishnayos, when Rebbe pulled together the Mishnah, let me enlarge this a bit. This is an important point. So when Rebbe did this, it wasn't possible for him to include every single teaching. Some of them were left out, where you won't find them in the Mishnah, and it's called a Brisa. Okay, and we'll see when we get to Gemara how that works. And a lot of the Brisas were still Baal Peh, so it wound up having discussions that wound up having these type of discussions. So this is just an example of how the logical flowchart of a Gemara would go. Now, one of the things that I used to do in my yeshiva when I was an 8th grade Rebbe was that I used to teach my Talmidim how to make logical flowcharts. One good example is a telemarketer, when they annoy you with these phone calls from a telemarketer, what they're reading off a script. And it says, do you want to buy life insurance? Do you have life insurance? If you say no, they say, would you be interested in buying it? If they say yes, then you say, maybe you need a little more. Okay, so that's a script that helps follow how a discussion goes. So this is one example of what happens. An Amayra Tanayim with the people who did Mishnah, Amarayim did Gemara. And so an Amara makes a statement. When the Gemara, he makes a statement. I heard that the halacha is, let's say that about something about Yom Kippur, if we're following yesterday, then a second person comes up and says, again, they're just different colors, they'll be facing each other in a moment. So a different person says, well, I heard the halacha is different than this is, okay? So let's give a simple example. An Amara makes a statement that after you eat meat, you have to wait 6 hours. So then a Brisa is somebody else says, while they were sitting and hashing out what was going on, what the halachas were, someone says, well, I heard that it's only 3 hours that you have to wait, okay? So there are two ways to resolve this conflict. One way is that he says, well, there's a Brisa that in our case, for example, if you're familiar, people from Ashkenaz, from Germany and areas, those areas in Europe, have a minhag, a custom that they only keep 3 hours between meat and dairy. Or you could say it's talking about two different cases. They were talking about different situations and that would resolve the conflict. So again, what we're doing is explaining how this goes, and this is Rabbi Spivak. I know it seems very esoteric, it might seem very abstract right now because we're not actually learning a Gemara. What I'd love for you to do now is just remember that we had such a discussion, and then when we get to it in the Gemara, we'll be able to refer back. And typical Rabbi Spivak had just a practical, brilliant way of explaining it. And here we go. So imagine I gave you an example with milk and meat. So he goes with a different set here. So here we go. Imagine, this is the discussion now, okay? Imagine if an Amira made the following statement. The Gemara would say the bracha, the blessing, the bracha on potato chips. 1 second, please. Just get my, okay? The bracha on potato chips is sha'akol niyeh b'dvarai, okay? That would be the bracha on potato chips. So a person, imagine we're in our virtual Beis Medrash and a study hall where people were discussing learning, and someone came along and he said the bracha, the blessing on potato chips is sha'akol, okay? That's the bracha. So that's the correct bracha. Sha'akol niyeh b'dvarai is a bracha that we make typically on water and meat, and what it is, it's basically a go-to bracha if something doesn't fit into the category of other brachas. Hamaitzi lechem min haaretz we make on bread, mezainas we make for grain, something that grows on a tree, right? We make a bari pri ha'etz, blessed be Hashem that makes the fruits of the tree. Something that grows from the ground, like a cucumber, you make a bari pri ha'adama. Everything else gets thrown into this bucket of sha'akol niyeh b'dvarai, which means everything. Shehakol is everything. Shehakol, that everything niyeh was created. It became b'dvarai, with Hashem, with God's word. So shehakol niyeh b'dvarai is a general bracha. If you don't fit into any of the other bracha categories, that's what you do. Okay, so we have someone made an Amira made a statement and said, well, the bracha to make on potato chips is sha'akol. Now, someone comes along, okay, that's this person here, okay, so this Talmud Chacham and Amira, one of the people, the Chachamim that did the Gemara, would say the bracha is a sha'akol. Now, somebody else comes along, he says, hold it, there's a Mishnah, we have a teaching that says that bari pri hadama is the right bracha. Obviously, we have a conflict between the statement that said sha'akol is the bracha and the statement that said bari pri hadama. Okay, so here we have the conflict between these two. Now, the rule is that an Amira cannot argue on a Tana. A Tana were the people of the Mishnah. Once the Mishnah closed, the people in subsequent generations were not able to argue unless they had a brisa, they had a statement that supported their opinion. So what Rabbi Spivak is pointing out here is that the way to resolve it, I'm not going to read the whole text, but the Amira would have two ways of resolving it. One way is, if he found a teaching, he found a brisa, so this person on the left that said sha'akol said that, again, this is the reason that this Mishnayos here is in his hand, is to show that this is a Tana from the previous generation. So if the Tana said it's a bari pri hadama, the Amira would have a problem saying it's a sha'akol. But he says, hold it, I found the brisa, I found a written statement, a statement from a Talmud Chacham that said that actually the bracha is sha'akol. Or another way of resolving it is that the facts are different. In other words, you will see this so many times in the Gemara. Again, I know this is a little bit abstract, but it will, trust me, it will be very helpful when we get to the Gemara, and you'll see how confusing it could be if you didn't have this information. So the second way is that when the rabbi said the bracha on potato chips is sha'akol, or bracha on potato chips was a hadama, there were different types of chips, because if slices of potatoes are whole pieces of vegetable, okay, so that would be, if you have regular potato chips like these here, that the bracha on that would be in fact bari pri hadama, because it looks like it retained the look of a potato because it's just sliced and prepared. However, if type of Pringles, okay, the type of potato chips made from powdered potatoes, if the potatoes were powdered like Pringles are, and they're just ground up, now it doesn't look like, there's no whole pieces of vegetable. So most of the poskim, most of our chachamim nowadays say that Pringles you make a shakal. So again, every time we have this conflict, a conflict, either the Amira could say, well, I have a different teaching that's different than you are, than you said in the Mishnah, and he has someone to support his logic, or he says that the facts are different. Okay, I'm gonna just stop here. Some review questions. Style of Gemara different. Let's do it quickly. Style of Gemara is different than Mishnah. We won't do all of them, some of them. So Mishnah is generally a statement of halacha. Gemara is a discussion. Discussion topic of Gemara is called a sugya. Okay, a teaching of a Tana could be a Mishnah or a Braisa. With whom can an Amira? Amira is the later generation. They cannot argue with a Tana. So we said there are two ways. An Amira can defend himself by saying, I have another Tana that I agree with, who had a Braisa. Or another way that he could explain himself would be to say that he was talking about a different situation, like we gave the example of Pringles. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second. I'm going to invite you to chat if I did not explain this well. And please don't be shy. You can, if this wasn't clear, please feel free to type something. I'll be glad to clarify if clarification is needed. Okay, great. So let's go then. I'm not going to do all of these questions. Now we'll go to this next step, and then we'll just about be ready to start with our Gemara Mitzvah tomorrow. So we have these different types of logic, of methodology of discussions, and one way that we talk about them is we have these in this again. You will not find this in a general Gemara, but in our format, when Rabbi Spivak and I were we were setting up these workbooks. What we did was we color coded everything, and it has also a visual cue. So this memra, right, this statement here, is a quote bubble, right? You see that it looks like somebody's being quoted, somebody's saying something. And that's a statement. So we start by telling us just a fact. Almost every Gemara starts with a memra, with a statement. And as the discussion goes, occasionally someone will come with a kasha. He'll have a question on this, obviously symbolized by a bomb in this brownish type color. I'm sorry, I just do primaries, mauve and taupe, whatever. So, these are just primary colors. It's some sort of brown. That's maybe you can help me out if you want to, if you're good at this, you can chat what the right color is. My wife's an artist. She would tell me in a moment. So kasha is a question, and we have that little bomb, meaning it's sort of blowing it up. Okay, so we're trying to say when something is difficult to explain, and then we come with an answer, a teretz that answers the kasha. Okay, and in the next lesson, in lesson 8, we're going to go through other components. Typical, Rabbi Spivak gave us some tools to help understand it. And walking through this, that's why the combination of that logical flow that we learned in lesson number 6, and now using, again, these 3 types of statements where you have, types of logic. It's either a memra, a statement, a kasha, a question, A teretz is an answer. And Rebbe took this thing with the potato chips and used this as an example. The thing we just taught earlier, Rebbe locked it in to the tools that we're using to delineate which parts of logic we're talking about. Okay, so the memra, the statement, an Amira makes the following statement. An Amira made a statement. And again, an Amira was somebody from the Gemara. The correct bracha to make on potato chips is Shakal Niyeh B'Dvarai. Okay, that statement is a memra. So this would be step number one. Step number two is a kasha, right? He said, well, I have a Tana. We have a Mishnah. A Mishnah was said by a Tana, okay? And he said that it's a Bari Pri Adama. Hold it, time out. You just said it's a Shakal. We have a conflict. And now we're attacking the statement of the Amira. How could you say that it's a Shakal Niyeh B'Dvarai if it's a Bari Pri Adama? This is a visual cue that Rebbe used. Thank you, right, Amira Gemara, thank you. Thank you very much. Elisheva Kersham Amshed, very good. Tana, Amira is Gemara, Tana is a Mishnah, right? Amira sounds like Gemara. That's the verbal cue. Thank you very much, Elisheva. Okay, the word Amira sounds very similar to Gemara if you get confused. Thank you. And Tana goes on a Mishnah. Now here, this is another thing. By the way, there's loads of research to support how the even simple icons like this trigger certain thinking. So throughout the book, we have these illustrations that this kasha, this bomb, so to speak, is going into the brick building of what the Amira said. Okay, so the Amira statement was here in the Memra that it's a Shakal Niyeh B'Dvarai, right? That's this. I should have made this in green. So this statement, the Amira statement was in green. But we'll do it here at least. So this was a Memra. This was a statement, right, that the Amira said that the correct bracha for potato chips is Shakal Niyeh B'Dvarai. Now, step number two, where we get to some sort of brownish color, that we have a kasha, we have a question, because the Mishnah says that you should say a Bari Pri Adama. So this is a direct conflict. This smacks into the statement of the Amira. We have a conflict, and now we have a teretz resolving the conflict. One way we said is that a shakol is for powdered potatoes, okay? So that's the teretz here in gold, is that they're actually talking about two separate situations, like we said. So the Mishnah, we should say a Bari Pri Adama before eating potato chips, that was talking about sliced potatoes. Powdered potatoes, Pringles, you make a shakol. This is really the way Gemara often looks. And if you just remember it, by the way, I as Rabbi Spivak, I had a great zchus to be. I was the principal of Yeshiva Dachinam for 20 years. And during that time, Rabbi Spivak was our Gemara Rebbe for many of those years. And I actually I had the nachas of watching him create this in black and white sheets before we invested the money to do it with graphics and all. Parenthetically, I can't take credit for any of Rabbi Spivak's fantastic work. The only thing I can take a little bit of credit for, I was his 8th grade Rebbe in Yeshiva Spring Valley many years ago. So when Rabbi Spivak was making this, I actually went in and tested the class with and without these visual tools, and it was just remarkable how even a simple visual tool like this would help. So step number one is the brachas of shakal. We have step number two, akasha. Yeah, but we said it's Bari Pri Adama, and in other words, this Mishnah tends to destroy what the Amira said, and now we say, no, bring back the wall, rebuild the wall, it's all good. One is talking about powdered, one is talking about sliced. Okay? Let's just go through, let's just do these we'll just the first one. Shaka V'Tarya is a discussion, a back and forth of the Gemara. What do we call one piece of Shakavataya is, again, it's a statement. If it's a memra, that's usually what we started with. A fact is called a memra, a target and attack, right? We want to discuss this. Rebbe didn't do it in detail here. I'm not going to do it here in detail, but as you can see from this, from the ball and chain here, right? There's a target of an attack and the attack. So the target here is the Amira, and the Mishnah is attacking, so to speak, the logic of the Amira. Okay, so let's just move on to the next lesson where we do other types of logic. So a fourth thing is called a proof, a raya. A raya is something that proves a statement, okay? Use logic, or we have a brisa. That's step number four. A fourth type of logic, a dechia. You see the hand pushing away. That visual image is rejecting a proof, where we say, I'm sorry, this is not comparable. A she'ela is a question, a request for information. Often, some people confuse the word she'ela and kushya and kasha, that their kasha is a question that attacks something or that challenges a point of view. A she'ela is a general question. If I ask, what time is it now? Or when's the shir going to be over? That would be a she'ela's birur. And a tshuva, a teretz is an answer to a kasha. Tshuva is an answer to a she'ela. And again, as we go through the Gemara, you'll be able to see many of those items, these types of logic. And finally, the last one is maskana. And maskana is a final conclusion. And that really ends these 8 types of logic. And as I said, you'll see, let's just go ahead just for a moment. If just looking later in the book, okay, here's where the Gemara starts. So I hope we're getting to this tomorrow. This is actually how the Gemara is going to start. When we start Gemara tomorrow, so this is Shir Aleph, and step number 1 is a statement. Matzah peres mefuzarin. If someone found scattered produce, he's allowed to keep it. And the Gemara asks a she'ela, question, Kama, how much does it have to be? Okay, that's what it really looks like in the real world of Gemara. I see a question. What was the third step? Did you mean the third logical component that we had? If that was, I see B, if that was the question of the third one, if I went too quickly. Here are the 3 actually. Here, Rebbe has them listed here. Memra is a statement. Kasha is a question, usually on a statement. And a teretz is a response to that question. Okay, a teretz answers that kasha, which in our case, the concept of having Pringles and regular potato chips was the teretz that answered the question number 4. Did I explain that? Did you get it? Just give me a yes, and we'll move on to some other details about the Mishnah, and then I'll okay, great, wonderful. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. So let's just review the second cluster. This is a little more difficult because we don't have practical examples of it, but you'll get more than enough of it in the Gemara itself. Raya is a proof when you want to prove something. A dechia is pushing away the proof. Rebbe, in the Brachas book, Rabbi Spivak had an absolutely adorable way of explaining these things with a proof and a raya and a dechia. Rebbe wrote just a short paragraph that 2 brothers were discussing. Someone said, "What's for dinner?" What's for dinner is a she'ela, right? Okay, what's for dinner? This is a she'elas birur. It's a general question, right? This is blue. So he says, "What's for dinner?" And so the other fellow says, "Well, we're having hamburgers." Okay, that's a tshuva on his she'ela. He asked the general question, "What's for dinner?" And the tshuva says, the other kid answers back, "Hamburgers." Now, he comes with the dechia. He says, "Hold it. Maybe we're having sloppy Joe. Maybe we're having meatballs." Okay, so actually, it's actually a kasha, really. So he was asking him a kasha. How could you say that we're having? What's the proof? You came with the proof. I'll push away your proof. It's only the. So he pushes it away, and then he answers, "Well, I saw mommy brought hamburger buns." So that would be a tshuva, an answer, a teretz, or so again, you go through these logical components. What are we having for dinner is a she'ela. The answer to that was hamburgers. The question was, hey, maybe we're having meatballs, and the answers to that, well, I saw mommy defrosting, bought hamburger buns. So that again, that's just a practical way of how this all goes. Work into the glossary for quick reference. Are you talking about the terms? You mean, is there a glossary of the terms? If I all right, let me just move on a bit. Now, here's a proof before we go. Let's do the sugya about potato chips now. So Rebbe's going to continue. Remember we had those 3 steps about the Pringles. So the Gemara says, the Gemara proves that the Amar is correct by quoting the Brisa. Okay, in the Brisa, the Tana said that the bracha was shakal. This is a proof because he had made that same statement. And step number 5, we reject this proof. We made an incorrect assumption, right? When the Brisa said the bracha is a shahakal, we're talking about potato chips. In the Maskana, we're talking about chocolate chips that everybody agrees is a shahakal. Okay, so the Brisa said that the bracha was a shakal liyabitvaray. When they said the word chips, here's another way of reviewing this information, having a proof. And we said, well, I have a proof because he said that the bracha on chips is shakal. And he said, no, I'm sorry, we were talking about something else. The bracha for potato chips and chocolate chips, obviously, if one of them one of the brises was talking about chocolate chips, you wouldn't have a proof to it. Okay, and then we try. So the Gemara tries a different proof. And really, this is pretty familiar with how it goes. The Gemara says, "What would be the bracha for corn chips?" It's not challenging anything. It's a general question, and we answer another brisa that if it was made from pressed, crushed whole wheat kernels of corn, the bracha would be a hadama. If they were made from ground up, the bracha would be shahakal, which gives us the information and now helps us with the she'ela. So you have actually practical use for all of these things. And then in the conclusion, we would say the halacha is that any chips made from whole pieces of vegetable would be a hadama. Anything that's made from thing ground in the powder would be shahakal, and that would be the end of the sugya. So this would be a typical, if there is such a thing, a typical sugya where we go through the logical terms one at a time. The answer, by the way, is there isn't a glossary for it. Discuss with Rabbi Spivak. I mean, you can really refer back to the notes, but it's used constantly throughout. This is part of the same book, so you can really refer back to. I'll actually discuss it with Rabbi Spivak for future editions, but I think typically we go back and refer to the original. You have it usually in the things that you need a glossary for, usually would be in the green pages. So at the beginning of the book, you can refer to it like that way. Okay, one more thing, and then I'm going to open up to general questions. So here, this is something that we're going to do throughout the Gemara, where we have these written steps. Okay, and you would write either the example with the hamburgers and with the hamburger, what's mommy making for supper would be step 1, a she'ela. The tshuva, the answer is hamburgers. Then he would say a question. However, it's okay, and I'll prove it to you because I saw defrosting. I forgot to say that. I'll prove it to you by saying that I saw mommy defrosting chopped meat. Then he asks a kasha, but it should be, what's the proof? Maybe she's making a hamburger. He said, well, I saw her getting buns. So that would be a way that you would write down these 5 steps. Now, just a few more random items that Rebbe included in this very wisely. And it actually has a bit of confusion here with the term. The word mitzia means a found object or a lost object. Okay, matzah means to find. So the name of the Gemara that we're using, the Perek is called Elu Metzias. The Gemara is called is Baba Metzia, and it's a little bit confusing because the word Metzia here means middle and not a lost object. And the way Rebbe explained it here, if you look, Nezikin are damages. If you remember yesterday, we went through the 6 categories, the 6 files. One of them was Nezikin, which covers damages, and in Nezikin, these would be logical things to include in Nezikin. Here, the laws of Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the largest rabbinic court, which was in Yerushalayim. So those are the halachas. Makas are lashes that people got as a punishment. Shvua was swearing. Now, tort law, damages, you see this has 11 prakim. If you see here, there's like 11 chapters. This has 8 chapters. If there was a Nezikin, there would have been 30 chapters here because it's a lot of stuff. So therefore, what they did was, Rebbe divided it up into Baba Kama. Kama is the first, Metzia is the middle, Basra is the last. So again, just a little bit confusing. Look here. However, Rebbe decided that since this Masechta was too long, it had to be divided. He split it into 3 smaller Masechtas, each one with 10 prakim. He called them a gate, a Baba, a gate. So first gate, second gate, third gate. We're going to be learning Baba Metzia. This is just important because people sometimes have a little conflict and it's a little confusion. We have this in English also, right? We have words that sound similar and are really different things. So we're going to be learning the Perek called Elu Metzias, and it's on Daf Chaf Aleph Amar Aleph, on page Chaf Aleph Amar Aleph. I'm going to show it to you tomorrow in an actual Gemara. And it talks about lost objects. So this is general. So far, we did information about it. That's good for any Gemara. Here, we have the Elu Metzias here. It talks about a lost object. And an Aveda is Avad means to lose. The Aveda is the lost object. Plural is Avedos. And somebody that found it was called a Metzia, and plural is Metzios. So Elu Metzios, these are the findings. If somebody found something that someone else should lost, there's sometimes that he could keep it. And we call it Elu Metzios Shalai. These are his, you're allowed to keep it, again, from the vantage point of the finder. And certain Metzios, Achayev Lahachres, are responsible to announce, and that's actually what it looks like. And so here, again, this is just the pre-information before we start Gemara tomorrow. So this fellow found something, he's allowed to keep it. We call this Shalai, it belongs to him. I found an object, whoever lost it, come speak to me, is Chayev Lahachres, is responsible. Hachres means to announce. And this word, we will find an incredible amount of times throughout the learning of this Gemara, and this is called Yish, or Yesh is the technical term, but Yish means to give up hope, and this is something that we're going to be talking a lot about. If somebody gave up hope, you're allowed, that finder is allowed to keep it. If the owner gave up hope, if you didn't give up hope, then you can't. And miyayish is like the verb, when he gave up hope. So if somebody gives up hope, the finder is allowed to keep it. If not, then he's not allowed to keep it. Okay, so here in this case, right, I lost my object and I'll never get it back. So in this case, the finder could keep it because the person was miyayesh. This is the one who lost the object. If he thinks that he's going to get it back, then he is not miyayesh. One general rule it is that if the lost object has a siman, a marking that's clearly identifiable as the person's, then that's something that the person is likely not to be miyayesh, not to give up hope on, because he says he's going to get it back. Okay, so you found a notebook here. Your notebook, and let's say you found a notebook in the lunchroom. Again, we're speaking. This is for kids, right? You see the owner drew a picture of a Sefer Torah on it. So in his mind, he's going to be able to prove that it's his, because he'll say that's called a siman. He has an object there that if the fellow, okay, so this guy here who has a notebook here, he says, I lost my notebook, but it had a siman. I'll tell the finder my siman, and he'll return it to me. So he's not going to be miyayish, and therefore the person who finds it has to announce it. So these are, again, remember, I don't teach two things at a time. So what we're talking about is whether or not people can keep objects. It's elu metzias. These are the halachas of lost objects. The general rule is if a person gives up hope, then the other one's allowed to keep it. Okay, the clean-shaven fellow lost it. Fellow with the beard, was the one who picked it up. I lost the pen and had no siman. I don't think I'll ever get it back. So he is miyayish. Therefore, this fellow's allowed to keep it. So, and we'll see, but a lot of it depends on circumstances, where it was. So again, something with a marking. He drew a picture of a Sefer Torah. The fellow would not give up hope. But in this case, the person would give up hope, again, because there is a siman. As I said, the other possibility is pre-COVID, when streets were crowded. Sorry about that. Okay, I lost my headphones in a really crowded city. Even though they had a siman, I'll never get it back. So some of it is context. Not only is it if there is a siman or not, but it's also where it was lost. So I lost it in a crowded city. He's going to be miyayish. And therefore the fellow who finds it is allowed to keep it. And however, if it's in a smaller area where the person has hope of getting it back, then the person would not be miyayish. He wouldn't give up hope. Therefore, he can't keep it. And here's the big idea here. Okay, so a very important point. Yish is the thing that determines whether a metzia is his. The finder can keep it, or if he has to announce it. It's not necessarily the siman, because the siman is a marking. Because if you have a marking in a crowded place, then you have to give it. You won't have to give it back, because we expect the person to give up hope because it's in a crowded area. Now, this last thing this is just visual illustrations. The Mishnah begins. We're going to actually start with the Gemara. The Mishnah begins. Elu metzias shaloi. These are found objects that belong to him. And Elu chayv la'achras, other ones that he's obligated to announce. And it gives many examples. Rebbe just put visual cues here. So matzah peiros mufazaran, if he found scattered produce. Some of these we're going to have in the Gemara pretty soon. Ma'is mufazarais, there were money that was scattered around that looks like this. Krichas b'shus harabim, bundles of grain in a public area that would tend to get lost or trampled, just like that fellow lost his headphones in the city. Igulei dvela is a circle of figs. That was commonly done this way. All of these things have in common that they are not identifiable. Kikara shel nachtam, if you found bread of a baker, the finder is allowed to keep it because there's no marking. Now, obviously, the flip side of this would be if it was bread of a private person, you would be able to keep it, okay? Or if he had the figs in a different way that wasn't like this. This was standard. In other words, it's like you're saying, I lost a dozen eggs. That's not a siman. Normally, if you lost 17 eggs, that would be a good siman. That would be a good marking. But if you say I lost a dozen eggs, it's not a good marking because obviously nobody knows. Everybody does it that way. So strings of fish. This is how it was. This is how typically the fishermen would have it, and regular cuts of meat. Um, all of these have in common wool, flax that was bound this way, purple wool. All of these objects, this was, they were using the stuff that was around those days. So any of these simanim, hare elu shalai, this belongs to him. And Rabbi Yehuda says, if there is a shinoi, if there's something different about it, you announce it. What happened? If he found pressed figs, and there was cheres, there was a piece of pottery in there for some reason, a person put a piece of pottery in the thing of figs, or there was some money in a loaf of bread, that's unusual, then you would have to announce it because that would be considered a simon. Okay, we're done. We're ready to start our Gemara. So tomorrow, in Mitzvah Shem, we're going to be starting Gemara, and we're going to start after this Mishnah that said about all the things that you're allowed to keep. We're going to the Gemara through a series of questions and answers is going to clarify what exactly it's talking about. And here's the actual Gemara, the Mishnah, Elu Metzias Shalai. These are the objects that belong to him, the Elu Chayiv Lahachris, and these you're responsible to announce. So Elu Metzias Shalai, he repeats it again. These you could keep and these you can't. Let's talk about the ones you could keep first. If you found Paris Mufazarn, fruit that was spread out, Mais Mufazarn, money that was spread out, bread of a baker, all those pictures that we showed above, the bread of a baker, that Igulei Dvela was pressed figs, Kikar Shal, I'm sorry, Krichas I'm sorry. The Kikar Shal Nachtem is a bread, Machrez Shal Dogim, fish, meat, wool, flax, all of those things you're allowed to keep. Rabbi Yehuda says if there's a shinoi, then you have to announce it, and that brings us to an end. I'm going to stop and take questions now. I hope we're all on board so far. Again, this was a little bit more difficult because we didn't have enough road testing. We're going to be doing every one of these things in rapid order. Once we start the Gemara, a lot of these pieces will fit in. I'm going to stop the screen sharing, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free. You should all be unmuted. If anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourself and just ask one, or you can use the chat.